Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and the weekly horoscope columnist on Astrology Hub. And I want to welcome you to Christopher Renstrom Astrology. This week, I would like to talk to you about the stellium of planets appearing in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. We already have the Sun and Pluto traveling through Aquarius and Mercury, but in order to make a stellium in astrology, you need to have 4 or more planets in one zodiacal sign. This week, the planets Mars and Venus will be joining the other planets in the zodiac sign of Aquarius, creating a stellium. Now, I could go ahead and break down what each planet means and how it comes together in a stellium and all those sorts of things, but I thought instead I'd rather tell you a wonderful story, a wonderful Aquarian story, something that signifies so much the sign of Aquarius, Pluto being in Aquarius, and what these planets in Aquarius are going to be like. The themes of the story, I hope you will find quite resonant in your life and in the world nowadays. The story I'm going to tell you is the story of the film Metropolis, which was made by Fritz Lang in the year 1927. Metropolis is an extraordinary film. It's seen as pretty much the science fiction film pioneer of that period of time. And it just spoke so much at the time that it came out. It was heavily censored, quite controversial, and in fact, it was censored to pieces, which over the decades following 1927 were gradually recollected to recreate or reconstruct the film Metropolis itself. And this is something that you can view on YouTube or you can rent. It's a beautiful film, shot in black and white, and it's probably one of the most famous films of Fritz Lang, along with the German film M, which starred Peter Lorre. So, what is Metropolis about? Metropolis begins with a change of shift of workers. What you see is this tremendous mass of men walking with their heads bowed. They're all dressed in dark uniforms with caps over their head, and they're just kind of like shuffling somewhere between a zombie apocalypse zombie and a Frankenstein monster, okay? They're just sort of like shuffling behind each other in this tunnel. And there's so many of them that they fill this tunnel. And they shuffle in one direction, and they're heading towards a huge elevator carriage that is going to take them down into the depths of the earth. The image that it's expressing here is that of miners. At the same time that these men are heading towards this carriage, there's another carriage that is opening up, and an equally large amount of men dressed in the same way are shuffling, heads down, towards the camera. This is the shift change, and it brings up ideas of mining, of underground, and immediately it brings up Pluto. Pluto, as you know in astrology, was named after the Roman god of the underworld. So Pluto was not only the god of death and the underworld in Roman mythology, but Pluto lends its name to our word plutocracy, which means the moneyed class. And what this referenced was a shift at a period of time in our world civilization away from agriculture to precious metals that were mined from the earth itself. So gold, silver, rubies, precious metals, things that go on to become coins or back coins, these are all associated to Pluto. And plutocracy, as I said, means moneyed or wealthy class. This is the realm that these workmen are shifting through as they change their shift to go to work. And it's a miserable life, and it's completely dull and tedious and dreary. This is how we feel when we see this. This is unfair. Why are these people being treated this way? We lift up to the world above this underground world of the workers, and we see the metropolis. All right. Metropolis is clearly inspired by the Art Deco skyline of New York City. New York City in the 20s We had just seen the Chrysler Building go up. The Empire State Building, I think, was still under construction. But New York City was known as a city of skyscrapers, of towering edifices, all done in this gorgeous Art Deco manner. And this is Metropolis more so. So Metropolis is more than just spires. Metropolis is entire towers that go flying up to the sky. These towers are so large and they're so huge that there are streets below, but if you want to get around Metropolis, you want to be traveling up in the bridges. And the bridges connect one tower to another. And these towers are so monumental, and these towers are so huge that they have biplanes flying underneath the bridges. So the bridges are full of automobile traffic, of people going about their daily lives in this magnificent metropolis. And it's so high and it's so immense that biplanes fly around the bridges. This is how enormous the city is. And here in the towering spires of Metropolis are the elite. These are the plutocrats. This is the moneyed class who gets all of their money from the workers below. But the workers below don't see this world, they merely serve it. So up here in the world, we are introduced to Freda, who is, and this is black and white, but from the coloring, you can tell he's very white and he's very blonde and he's very youthful. And the first thing you see him doing is he's engaging in athletics. He's running a race, maybe throwing a javelin. If you're familiar with these motifs from the zodiac, then you know that the fifth house is the house that is most connected to Leo, to the sun. These are the golden children. These are the sportsmen, going through their Olympic feats, competing with each other, not ruthlessly, but with good fellowship and spirit. They may lose and go, I'll get you next time, Freda, and so, but he is the golden man. And the reason he's this golden man is because his father is the architect of Metropolis. His father created this monumental city. So Freda is the most wealthy and the most beautiful, of course, and the most youthful of the youth, and excels at athletics. So on this particular day, he goes to a place which is called Club of the Suns. Now, that's not the sun in the sky, S-U-N, but S-O-N-S, the Club of the Suns. It's an exclusive club that is attended by the sons of all the fathers who are elite in Metropolis. And because this film is a silent film, you get these subtitles. And I don't know if you're a fan of silent films. I'm an extraordinary fan. Like I am a devoted fan of silent films because there's so much more emotion in them and the beauty of the lighting, especially in a film by Fritz Lang. You're going to have gorgeous, gorgeous lighting. So a subtitle comes up when he goes into the Club of the Suns, and it says, "Fathers, for whom every revolution of the machine wheel meant gold, had created for their sons the miracle of the eternal gardens." So this is the most elite, the most exclusive club that you could imagine. So Fred, after, throwing a javelin or maybe tossing a discus or something like this, retires to the club. And there are different manservants who wait on him. One of them says, "Would you like to come choose one of the ladies to entertain you in the Eternal Gardens?" And this is such a fabulous scene. He's like, yes. So he goes to the Eternal Gardens, and there are these ladies, and they're bedecked in gowns and veiled gowns of the period with like huge, enormous headdresses. And they parade around the garden. I don't know what else they do with their lives, but anyway, they parade around the gardens as if they were aristocratic women in Versailles and something like this. You can just imagine that they're like, Freda, and Freda's like, "Oh, ladies," and they're like, Freda, and so they flirt and things like this. And he chases one of them around a fountain and spills water on her, and she's like, oh, she protests, but she's delighted and adjusts her headpiece. At this moment, the doors to an elevator, which are across from the gardens, open. Usually the doors of the elevator open and they emit a guest, someone who's going to join them and be like, "Hey." But instead, what is in this elevator is a woman with fiery eyes who is gaunt but beautiful. So she's not, she's gaunt. You can tell that she's not well fed, and she wears simple clothes, and she's holding the hands of two children, and she's surrounded by children. These children have ashen expressions. There's no volume in their hair. They look old before their time, and they look intimidated by where they've been taken. And she stands there with the children, and she looks at all the people in the garden, and she says to the children, "These are your brothers and sisters." The people in the garden, the ladies, and Freda look at the woman like, and this woman, this mysterious woman, beckons to them in the garden and points to the children and says, "These are your brothers and sisters." It's almost like an apparition has materialized. And so the women are like askance. But Freda is like drawn to her. He clutches his heart. He's such a solar figure. He's blonde. He throws a javelin and a discus and runs. And he clutches his heart. This is the thing that he clutches. And this is a beautiful period in German cinema where theatricality is still very much a part of film acting. And so this is something that you would see on stage. And so you're seeing this clutching of the heart, that this is where he is sensing, this is where he's reacting to what he sees. And she looks at him, and immediately the butlers or the manservants or whatever surround the elevator and they hush her away. "You're not supposed to be here." And she just looks and the doors close. And of course, Freda is smitten. It's more than smitten. I mean, it's smitten. It is romantic, but there's something more that's been triggered in him, and he has to find her. And so the ladies are like, "Freda, I was entertaining you with my headdress." And he's like, "No, ladies, I must find this mysterious woman." He goes in pursuit of her. He finds out from the different, footmen that, she's from the underground city. And he's like, "The underground city, I've heard of that. And well, she's a worker and she wasn't supposed to be up here with those children. And we apologize. And maybe we'll spray deodorant or something like that to get rid of the rank smell." And Fred is like, "How do I get to the underground city?" And they're like, I don't know, subway. And so Freda descends into the underground city, really like Orpheus going and seeking Eurydice. He descends down into the underground city, and he's never been down here before. He wears white, flimsy clothing, he has blonde, beautiful hair, he throws a discus. He's never worried about anything. So he descends down into the city, and he smells the smoke, and his eyes burn, and he has to adjust to the dark. And what he comes across, this image that you see, it's just breathtaking. The film cannot compete with special effects of today, but what it does do is that it's like a painting. It's like this expressionistic painting, and special effects cannot compete with it. It's just so beautiful. And what you see when his eyes adjust is this city of machines, which all have clock faces on them, rows and rows and rows, and it goes up and up and up, and it goes out and out and out. And there are men, again, in these uniforms and these caps, who are taking, imagine the hands of a clock, because that's really what it is. There's a clock face, and they're taking these hands of the clock, but they're life size. So they're taking these hands and they're moving them, in unison. So you just see the backs of them moving the hands of the clock in really beautiful, like expressionistic style. And it's a breathtaking image. And Freda, of course, is breath took. He's like, who are these people? And so they run these machines. Something's gone terribly wrong, and a number of them are reacting and looking away. Still, their hands are on the arms of the clock, but they're looking over. And one of the machines has overheated. There's an explosion, and several men fall into a burning pit where the machine was. Freda, who is watching the whole thing, Freda, by the way, is short for Frederick, has this hallucination. He has a number of hallucinations during this movie, but he has this hallucination of Magog, who was this Babylonian god of really hell. In the Jewish tradition, which comes out of the Babylonian tradition, was a gaping pit. It was a gaping pit. It wasn't associated with a devil or Satan or anything like that. It was a gaping pit, and it symbolized the gaping pit or mouth of the world, a world that could not be sated, that you fed things to. So think of like an oven, and this enormous jaw appears, and the men are falling into it. But the men that Freda sees, they're Babylonian men. They have shaved heads and chains, and they're being fed to this hungry god. He reacts and he pulls back. And then he comes back into his body, and they're the men, and they're running around. And no sooner do they sort of salvage the situation, maybe carry away the other men, like ants in an ant colony, they go back to gripping the hands of this clock and moving it. So it's not really explained what they're really operating, other than that they manage and maintain the machines. They manage and maintain the machines that power Metropolis. And because Metropolis is a hungry metropolitan area that consumes a lot of power, still does to these days, they cannot leave these machines. Their shifts are like 10 hours long. And so Freda goes back, he goes upstairs, he goes back to the surface world or whatever, and he hails a cab. And the cab's like, where are we to go? And Freda, because he's very German, he's very solar, he's very poetic, he's like, take me to the Tower of Babel. And he does. And the Tower of Babel happens to be, that's what he calls his father's offices. And so he's taken to his father's offices, where he reports to his father. Now, his father is introduced as a very cold and remote, inexpressive, stern fellow who's busy with numbers and accountants and overseeing his affairs. He's the master builder. He's very Aquarian. Aquarius is a zodiac sign that's very much connected to architecture, and he's very in his coldness, but Freda is his only son. And so he's taken to his father, and he reports to his father that there's been an explosion, and his father's like, why have I not heard of this? And he looks at his staff of men, and they're like, because everything that goes on in the city, his father knows about. So Freda's like, there's been this explosion and we have to do something about it. And the father's like, yes, it will be taken care of. This is Freda's first moment of seeing the underside of how Metropolis wins. It's how Metropolis is run. This is the Pluto, the underworld to the Aquarius sun. And so the Aquarian sun is the Metropolis. It's the utopia. It's these spires and science and arts and sciences and intellects and all these sorts of things. But the roots of this tree are down in the earth with these oppressed workers who work to the point of exhaustion, if not beyond. And so his father's kind of like, he patronizes Freda and says, why don't you go back to your pursuits? Because he's not really expecting his son to like whatever. Because it's a spoiled trust fund baby. What do you want from his father's life? But he notices that his son is very, distressed, and he's distracted, and he leaves abruptly. And so his father calls over a spy and asks him to follow him. There was this explosion, and he tells another man to go and investigate what this explosion was about. Freda is obsessed with the woman that he saw. He's obsessed with this underground city, with this explosion that nobody seems to care about or know about in the different shops and towers and places that he frequents. And so he descends back down to the city, and he goes down into the city, and he meets a worker who is manipulating the hands of the clock. And it's such a great image. All he's doing is manipulating the hands of this clock. And if you think of people like, for instance, the essential workers or an Amazon worker, it's people who are made to work these incredibly crushing long hours, and it's never a break. It's unrelenting. And here they are, and the image for this that Fritz Lang shares with us are the hands of a clock, the hands of time itself, and these are the gestures that they make. And he sees a worker who's moving these hands, and the worker is exhausted, and he falls back and he collapses into Freda's arms. And Freda, at a very Christ-like moment, says to the worker, change clothes with me. Wear my clothes. I will take on your worker's uniform, and I will take your place. And so they agree to this. And Freda takes it on, and because he's never worked like this before. He doesn't know what this is like. And so he does this, but he does it for 10 hours, and it's past exhaustion, and he begins to realize that he can't leave this station. And he does these different gestures. It's very dance-like, where it appears almost like crucifixions, but it's almost like crucifixion a la, I don't know, like Japanese kabuki theater or something. It's just, there are these different things in which he's laboring under these hands. It's a really beautiful image. During this period of time, the father hears word that there were plans that were discovered among the ruins of this explosion in the underworld of Metropolis. And so he goes and he seeks this mad inventor named Rotvan. He knows that Rotvan is very attuned to what goes on with the workers underneath. Rotvan is this extraordinary inventor who's lost a hand, and it's almost kind of a claw. Think Captain Hook. And you kind of get a feeling that he may be the generator of the ideas that the father has, or he's at least a peer of the father. And indeed, what we discover is that they were both in love with a woman named Helle, Hell. So there we have Pluto again, who died. And she happens to be the mother of Freda. In a choice of loves, she chose Freda's father, the master architect, over Rotvan, the scientist, because Rotvan loved her because she was a great lab assistant. And Freda's father was more husband materials. Anyway, she died in childbirth, giving birth to Freda. And that's why Freda's father can be both remote and obsessed with his son. And so there's been this kind of like rivalry between these two men, but yet the father needs to go and talk to this Plutonian figure. He may be the sun in Aquarius, full of the abstract ideas and running things according to a curriculum, but he needs to go to Rotvan, who is connected to the underworld. And one of the things that connects him to the underworld and his inventions is that he has invented something called the Machine Man, which he shows Freda's father. The Machine Man is a robot, but it's called in the subtitles a Machine Man. It's a fascinating figure. It's clearly the inspiration for CP-30 in Star Wars. You can imagine it's all gold. But what is kind of amazing about the Machine Man is that its mask was based on Tutankhamun, the King Tut. Metropolis is made in 1927, but Tutankhamun is discovered, I think, in 1925 or 1923. And so the mask of Tutankhamun is all over. This is the mask, or variation of this idea, is the face of the Machine Man, the robot, who can get up and walk on its own. And it sits on a chair beneath an upside-down star. So there's certainly something very occult or very satanic that's associated with this figure. And Rotvan says, I am going to resurrect Hell, who left me for you, and I'm going to put her spirit in this Machine Man, and she will live forever. She will be immortal. So it's kind of like this extraordinary Plutonian moment where this duel for Hell's love has never ended, even though she's passed away. And Rotvan is now going to resurrect her and put her in this robot body, basically. Frederson, and that's the name of the father, Frederson, he's fascinated, but he's also an Aquarian and a master builder and a businessman. He came here for a reason. He needs to get to the point, which is, what are these plans that I found? What is it that they came back with, that my spies came back with? And Rotvan says, oh, these are the plans to the catacombs beneath the city. And this is a direct reference to the catacombs beneath Rome that live under the city. And they lead to this underground cathedral. I've spied on it many times myself. And the father's like, well, can you show me what it is? And he's like, let me take you there. And so he takes him down to this hidden place. And underneath, Rotvan removes a rock and they spy this beautiful underground cathedral with burning candles and crosses. And there's a beautiful woman who is preaching. And of course, this is the woman that we saw earlier, Maria. And she is preaching. At this same moment, Freda, who has finished his shift and has been kind of like listless, he's confused. The other workers, there's a shift change. Well, they're going to this sermon. And so he goes with them. And he's completely exhausted. And he looks up, and of course, he sees her. And his eyes grow large, and this is who he's been looking for. And she's in the middle of this sermon, a sermon that is also being watched by Rotvan and Frederson, who is Freda's father. So what happens here is Maria tells the story. The sermon that she is preaching today is the story of the Tower of Babel. This is the story that she's telling, but it's done with an interesting shift. When she begins the story of the Tower of Babel, which we all know, it's how man in his hubris builds a huge tower up to God, and then God destroys it or makes the laborers not be able to understand one another, and they're confused. And that's where we get the word Babel. But her take on it is different. She begins and she says, the Tower of Babel was conceived by genius architects who forced laborers to build it. And that's something that the workers can relate to. They're like, yeah. The Tower of Babel was built by genius architects, but the genius architects were cold and indifferent and had no sympathy for the workers. And the workers, exhausted by their toil, had no imagination or spirit left inside them at the end of the day. And this is the big point that she makes. The minds that had conceived the Tower of Babel could not build it. And the hands that built the Tower of Babel knew nothing of the dreams of the brain that conceived it. So the minds of the Tower of Babel didn't have the expertise, the ability to build. But those who build, they have the expertise to build, to create, did not have the ideas and the dreams of the imagination of the genius architects. So there's this disconnect between the two. The people spoke the same language, but they didn't understand one another. The builders didn't understand what the ideas were to be, and the great minds didn't understand the particulars of how you build or construct something. It's because of this inability to get along or to communicate that the Tower of Babel grows into ruin. And then emerges the motto of her sermon, which is the whole point, really, of Metropolis: head and hands. Okay, so the head and hands need a mediator, and the mediator is the heart. This is how her sermon ends. And the workers are like, okay. And at this moment, she looks out to them and she sees Freda, and Freda sees her, and they run into one another in this lover's embrace. And Freda's father sees this, and he knows that she's dangerous. His son is becoming radicalized. Aquarius is both the authority and the rebel that rises up against the authority. This is what you really have in the Aquarian dynamic. This is why Aquarians can be very reluctant about taking on authority, because they know that if authority becomes too rigid, it needs to be rebelled against. But Aquarians can't always just be the rebel, because if they're just the rebel, then it's just chaos. And Aquarius is a fixed air sign, and you have to make order out of something. This is the great Aquarian dilemma. So the father sees them rush into each other's arms. He realizes that Freda is becoming radicalized by her. And indeed, that's exactly what's happening. Freda has discovered his destiny, which is to help the workers of the city. And he's driven by a desire to dismantle the system that his father has built. This fits in perfectly with Maria's philosophy. Her dream is of becoming a mediator between the working classes and the elite. What's fascinating about this take on the Tower of Babel is that Maria is presenting this story that it is in the nature of our civilization to build, to progress, to move towards the future. Our civilization can't stop it. But as we do this, that doesn't mean it's all right to oppress, to step on people, whether it's through colonialization or whether it's through industrialization. The people who have the vision of this future still rely on the people who can create it, and they're not necessarily the same thing. The mediator between these two halves is the heart, and that's where we get Leo in the equation here. So the romantic desire between the couple is fueled by, well, romance, but also aspirations for a better tomorrow. And here we really see the Venus and Mars in Aquarius, which are part of the stellium. There's a romantic draw, but what really fuels this is this dream, this vision of a utopian future in which the heart mediates between the head and the hands. After the throng of workers leaves, Freda, the couple agrees to meet later, like the next day or something like this, and they're happy that they know each other's names. And so Freda departs, but at that same, after he does, Rotvan abducts Maria. She's walking back to her worker's home in the dark catacombs, and he abducts her, and he takes her to his lab. And there, what he does is he's going to put her life force energy into his machine man. He's going to create this technological tool that he's going to show Frederson. And so this is what he does. She's kidnapped. She's put in a tube. Her life force is picked up and moved to the machine man, who gets up and moves. But then the machine man transforms into Maria. You see that the machine man has transformed into Maria, but you can tell that it's not Maria because the robot Maria, which I'll call it, has dark sort of like mascara, and her eye is always kind of like a little bit, half down, like a seductress. And so, successful and happy that he's brought to life, his robot Maria, Rotvan, writes a letter to Frederson, and he says, "Meet me at this exclusive nightclub, and I will introduce to you the robot that I have resurrected." And Frederson is like, okay. He goes to the nightclub, and at this nightclub are, as I said, all the elite of the Metropolis, but they're really dressed as bankers and businessmen and things like this. And so there's a nightclub number, okay? There's a nightclub number, and you see this enormous urn, rise up out of the floor, and then it turns to like a circle, and the bankers and the businessmen at this nightclub are watching, and they're intrigued by this. So this urn opens, and then it goes into a circle, and it's really kind of like a conch shell, if you think of it, and it's deliberately designed as a conch shell, but it's done in a deco circle. And behind, the lights come up from behind, and you see this silhouetted figure. It's a woman in this enormous silhouette of a peacock's fanning tail, with these veils. And she shows up behind this disc like this. She sort of appears, and she begins gyrating her hips in a circle. And she makes a little circle where she's standing. She gyrates her hips, and the men are like, fascinating. What's going on here? And then she whips out a scarf and she whirls it around like a dervish or like the dance of the seven veils, and the men are like, hey, this is fascinating. I can't possibly look away, and then she's on her knees and she's like doing a circle with her torso. She's just throwing her torso around in all directions, and the men are like, hey, I must get closer. And they begin to move closer. Her spell is irresistible. Then she does this hand and knee lift in a circle in her headdress. And the men are like, she's fascinating. I can't take my eyes off her. Then her arms are akimbo, and she's doing this, throwing her head back and forth. And the men are undulating along with her. Then she holds her arms like this and does this kind of motion. She's back to the arms akimbo with the head looking at them. And they're like about to explode. The lights go off, and they come back on. And then urn lifts up, and she's in this oriental position, and she is enthroned by 7 dragons with a fan, and she looks exactly like the whore of Babylon. And the men all crowd together, and they rush forward, and she chuckles. Okay, so it's a fabulous dance number, and you have to see it. Like, if there's anything to watch, Metropolis, it's the Whore of Babylon nightclub dance moment. It's like completely beyond fabulous. So Rotvan grabs Frederson and he says, isn't she perfect? She is the most perfect and most obedient tool which mankind has ever possessed. And what struck me watching it this time was that he was talking about AI. If you imagine these financiers as kind of like the elite of the tech companies, people who have conceived of an invention, and then they're funded by these bankers, and they themselves have become wealthy, and his description, she is the most perfect and most obedient tool which mankind has ever possessed. She can take on the look of anything, and she can draw forth, like she drew forth these wealthy men. They were completely under her thumb. And I was like, my goodness, this is Mercury in Aquarius. This is AI. And the power, the control, it's more than seduction. It's the power to deceive and to create chaos. She creates chaos in the club. The men fight each other, and out of jealousy, they need to have her, and she's like this. And so Frederson is impressed with what Rotvan has shown him. And he orders the robot, I want you to go to the lower depths in order to destroy the work of the woman whose image you have been created in. And the robot, she drops one eye and she's like, yes. Like she's got this, she's so fabulous. And so she agrees and ominously departs. And so now the robot Maria, dressed as the humble Maria, calls together, the workers in a sermon. And she tells them there is no mediator, and the time has come for them to take action themselves and to destroy the machines, that feed on your flesh, that drink your blood, that suck the life out of you. I want you to feed on the machines, to destroy these machines that feed on you. And so the workers are like, yes, yes. And she's like, let's kill the machines. And the workers are like, kill the machines, kill the machines. And so they race out. And so she is this AI figure. She's mixing it up with the workers. She's mixing it up with the elite. And she's sowing the seeds of chaos to make one group of people fight against the other people. But she's a tool. She's Mercury, the messenger. She's not the one who has sent. She's doing the bidding of Frid's father. And this is what she's done. And it's Maria who's this pure, virtuous, idealistic, woman feeling for the masses. Her replica, her double, this machine double, this AI duplicate is now the whore of Babylon or full of deception and lies, and turning people against one another with a dropped eye and enjoying it, and so they do. And so the workers assault the machines that kept everything going. They start dancing merrily, it's like a bonfire or something like that. But because the machines are no longer maintaining pressures and keeping certain forces at bay, one of them being water, the water begins to spill over and flood the tunnels. These machines not only the city, but they maintained the pressure underneath the earth and kept the water that cooled the machines at bay. But now that they've been wrecked by the workers who are destroying the machines, there's a flood of water. At this point, Maria has escaped Rotvan, and Freda has returned in pursuit of her because she wasn't at their appointed rendezvous. And so there are these extraordinary scenes of the water filling the tunnels, and the children who live in the city below, their parents are destroying the machines, and the children are running out and there's water pouring. So Maria grabs them and she puts them up on a statue, and there are these rods, just like the hands of a clock, and she's taking them and she's moving them in these different directions in order to stop the water that is flooding through. And it's a hopeless venture, but she can't leave the children and they're clinging to her. And it's just really, it's a magnificent piece of cinematography. The scene and this woman who is trying to save these children. And Freda finds her and he says, let's take the children up to the Club of Suns. We're going to take them there, and that's where they're going to be safe. And so they do this ascent up these ladders, and it's almost like Chutes and Ladders from Underground, but done in an Art Deco surrealistic way, and so the children follow them, as the water begins to rise. And so the parents, the workers, they're men and women, the workers want to assault the heart of the machine. And so there is the head operator who won't let them come forward. He's like, if you do this, the entire city will be destroyed. And they're like, well, we must. And he's like, well, if you're so concerned about your lives, where are your children? They're like, what do you mean, where are the children? You've released all of this water. The children are drowning. Go to your children. And so they're like, children and water, they're not here. Oh my God, what have we done? And so there's calamity and chaos and everyone's running around being sort of crazed. And so what happens is we have different things where Maria's kidnapped, freed, kidnapped again. The robot is discovered and taken to a stake and burned at the stake like a witch, and it's only in the burning that the robot reverts back to the metal body and everyone realizes that they've been had. It's a robot. It's an artificial intelligence. They're like, we've been had, and Maria somehow ends up in a bell, ringing it, because she's trying to escape Rotvan, who's trying to abduct and destroy her. And then he grabs her and takes her to the top of the building. And there's a fist fight with him and Freda. It's very silent movies, whatever, but it's fabulous. And so she goes, tumbling off the roof, and Rotvan falls to his death. And Freda rescues her, and they come back together at the end for this tableau. which is a very powerful tableau. Frederson, who is the father of Freda, realizes that he went too far, that he almost killed his only heir and his son. His son has raised his consciousness, shown him the imperfection, the cost that Metropolis has had on very human lives. And so he's shell-shocked, full of remorse. The head operator has actually saved the city. He's in his uniform, and Frederson is looking at him, and the head operator is looking at Frederson. Maria turns to Freda, and she says, go to them. Freda's like, why? What can I do? And she says, the mediator between the head and the hands is the heart, Freda. And you are that heart. Freda goes forward. The head operator is just, I guess I'll go back. And Frederson is like, I want nothing to do with this man. And Freda takes the hand of the head operator and he walks him over to his father. And he takes the hand of his father and he puts one hand in the next. And his hand goes over their hands and he holds them there. This becomes the tableau of the mediator between the head and the hands is the heart. And the head operator is the hands, okay? He's what's needed to make a reality, to make the dreams come true. And Frederson is the head that's caught up in the blueprints, the plans of the future, how to make these ideas happen, but also how society should be run. This is the way that society should be done. It should be run just like this, but it's a head that's divorced or doesn't know about the suffering that goes on underneath. And so Freda becomes the heart that connects the two of them together. And this is the ending image. It is Freda forming the bond between the workers and the powers that be. The reason that I wanted to share with you this story is I get so many questions as an astrologer. Pluto is entering Aquarius. What does that mean? Is that going to be bad for Taurus? Is it going to be bad for Scorpio? Is it going to be bad for me as an Aquarius? And I wanted to share this story because Aquarius is such a heavenly vaulted sign. You could almost think of it as the crown of the tree, but it is still rooted down in the earth. In fact, the dichotomy between the eternal heavens and earthbound mortality is symbolized in the two ruling planets of Aquarius. Uranus, who is named after the god of stars, of the heavens, of the sky. Uranus is eternity. And Saturn, which is his Greek name is Kronos, meaning time. Saturn is rooted in this world and this continual process of reconciling or bonding the heaven to the earth, the head to the hands, the toil of the hands, Uranus to Saturn. This is something that Aquarians grapple with constantly. And it is in their opposite sign, the sign of Leo, that you find the mediator, which is the heart. And that's also where we find our way in a world where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and where there's so much oppression and unfairness, the way that we can turn off to other people's plights and difficulties. The way, for instance, during the pandemic, we insisted on the essential workers. Where would we have been without them? But at the same time, the tremendous toll that it took on all of them. So who mediates between these extremes? The heart. And it seems like a simple, almost naive answer. But if you think about it, it's the heart. The heart is ruled by Leo. It's not anger. It's not out screaming. It's not vendetta. It's the heart. How would you treat another human being? Instead of fear about another human being taking what's yours or committing violence or whatever against you, what about leading from the heart, going with the heart? In a world in which we have fake images and communications and things like this, our mind can be manipulated. Our hands are on our iPhones tapping out messages and things like that. But to take a moment, maybe more than a moment, to connect to the heart, to let the heart be the mediator between the head and the hands. That is the message of Metropolis. And that is the message of this week's Stellium in Aquarius.